Good morning. We're in the middle of a conference. We're going through 6,000 years of Babylon. And the studies are in this book number 2. There's 5 books in the series, 6,000 years of Babylon. This is book number 2, volume number 2. And this is the last study in the book. And I've called it The Remnant. These books are available from Amazon or the Barrett Ministries website, www.barrettministries.org.uk, or from Amazon as a Kindle download or paperback. I've got a quote from Tozer. I admire Tozer, those who are old enough to remember him. He was in the 50s, a great man of God. And this is what he said, and this is over 50, 60 years ago now. Christianity has been watered down until the solution is so weak that if it were poison, it wouldn't hurt anyone. And if it was medicine, it wouldn't cure anyone. I think that's a fantastic quote, don't you? Let me read it again. Christianity has been watered down. I know Tozer was quite radical, but I like him and he was very honest. Christianity has been watered down until the solution is so weak that if it were poison, it wouldn't hurt anyone. And if it was medicine, it wouldn't cure anyone. In other words, it's neither fit for the thing or the dunkel. It's fit for nothing, you know. There's no bite to it anymore. It wouldn't cure anyone and it wouldn't kill anyone if it was poison. Well, we're looking at Babylon. This is a general study leading on to the next one. It's not a long study. I'm going to read Genesis 3 verse 15. Because the last study, we were talking about the battle of the seeds. We looked at the house of Haman and the house of Mordecai. And we see that the end result was that the house of Haman was handed to Mordecai. That's when Jesus comes and the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of Christ. There's going to be a changeover. And when the world think they're going to annihilate the nation of Israel, Israel will be elevated and restored to greatness for 1,000 years. Jesus is coming to restore the kingdom to Israel, not the kingdom to the church. We have the kingdom within us. We're going to reign with Christ as the bride. We're not physical Israel, but physical Israel will be in the millennium, and the house of Satan, the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdoms of Christ, Revelation says. So this battle's going on. And the principle is throughout the Bible. In every age, there's a Haman and a Mordecai and an Esther. In every generation, in every age. Because I'm teaching principles. So you can apply it to any age and in the future. The final Haman, the final Mordecai. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman. He's talking about Satan. And between thy seed and her seed. There's a battle of the seeds. The seed that came through Cain and the seed that came through Abel, well, the replacement Seth. And it shall bruise thy head and thou shalt bruise his heel. That battle started in Genesis and it's carried on, and it's fundamental to understanding the bigger picture. You know, it's all right looking at doctrines and looking at something specific, but I think it's good to look at the big picture and see what's actually going on in the world. So let's recap. Babylon under Nimrod ruled the whole world system. It was the first one world system, wasn't it? And God scattered the people. And it took 1,200 years later before Babylon again became a world power under Nebuchadnezzar. He ruled the then known world, didn't he? It was the biggest empire the world had known at that time. But it took 1,200 years. And there's a progression with each manifestation of Babylon. With the Nimrod, all we know, it was about worship. They built a city and a tower to reach God. That's worship, to reach God. That was a counterfeit. Because Satan wants to be like God. Satan's not the opposite of God. He's the counterfeit. He wants to be like God. I will be like the Most High. I'll sit on the sides of the north. So we think of Satan as the opposite of God. He's not, he's the counterfeit. So he appears as God. Satan is transformed, not can transform. This is Corinthians, Satan is transformed as an angel of light, not an angel of darkness. And Paul says, so it's no wonder that Satan's ministers transform themselves as ministers of righteousness. So there's ministers preaching righteousness, but they're the devil's plants, they're the tares that are sown in the field to pervert the church. There's always false prophets, 2 Peter 2. There were false prophets among the people in the Old Testament, and there will be false prophets among you who will bring in damnable heresies, making covetous, making merchandise of you, after your money. A preacher who's asking for your money is a false prophet. With food and raiment be content, O man of God. It's all right if you're a millionaire and a Christian, that's nothing. But when you call yourself a man of God, you've got to be happy with food and raiment and flee riches. That's the instruction in Timothy to a young minister. Or else you'll pierce yourself through with many hurtful lusts and harm. The love of money is the root of all evil. So we don't know much about Babylon from Nimrod, only it was about worship, because God wants worship from a pure heart, and the devil wants worship as well. But the second Babylon, we learn a bit more about it, so we know about the one we're in now. There's a progression. Now we've got music. There was no music for the Tower of Babel, was there? But now in Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, when you hear the sound of all types of music, that's the trigger to worship. Can you see how the world's besotted with music now? Do you think that's by chance that you can't go in a supermarket without music playing? Where can you go? You get in your car and people put the music on. Music governs, it's the universal language. Did you realise that? There is a one world language, music. Music is a language, it's a communication from my spirit to yours. That's why when you listen to music, it can alter your state of consciousness. You can be sad and put music on and you think, oh, I feel better now. You can put some sorts of music and it'll make you feel depressed. It's a drug. It's a communication. It's a language and it's universal. In China, they're not listening to Chinese music, they're listening to English rock. And in India and in Africa, we've not imported their music, they've imported the Western Babylonian music. Babylon spread to the whole world. So music is one of the triggers for the last days. And it happens in Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar. It's a prophecy. When you hear the sound of the music, music helps you to worship God or Satan. Music's very dangerous. A lot of Christians, I think they're worshipping God and they're dancing round the golden calf because they've taken Jehovah like they did round the golden calf. Let's have a feast to the Lord. And it's in your Bible, it's capital Lord. It's the real God. They thought they were worshipping the real God. How can you worship the real God through a golden calf? They must be worshipping Satan. Because people say, oh God, we love you. It doesn't... In vain you worship me with your mouth, but your heart's far from me. See, it's not what you say. The name of Jesus counts for nothing if you're dancing round a golden calf. Can you see how deceiving it is? How deceptive it is? And we've got churches dancing around the golden calf and don't know it. Culture came into it. Politics came into it. It's got more sophisticated, Babylon, in Nebuchadnezzar's time. Therefore, if it's more sophisticated, there was no music in the Garden of Eden. There were no politics. There were no culture. There were no legal system. Can you see in Nebuchadnezzar's day, they set a legal precedent that unless you worship the God, you'll be in the lion's den. Unless you worship the statue, you'll be thrown into the fire and furnace. It was a royal edict. There was none in the first Babylon. It's letting us know that in the last one that we're coming into, there'll be laws that will force us to worship Satan through the Antichrist. Can you see how the whole world with the pandemic were forced to have injections? And maybe that was good. I'm not criticising or praising that. I'm just saying facts that the whole world were forced, there were laws passed that you couldn't go to certain places without the vaccination. So it's setting the scene. The vaccines aren't the mark of the beast, for sure. But can you see how it's setting a precedent that the legal is coming into Babylon? And so there's more devious ways to manipulate people. When you've got culture, when you've got music, when you've got legal system, then there's more ways for the devil to control. And there's more and more ways now. There's electronic devices. Now we can put thoughts in people's heads. Do you know that with this G5? Now, with microwaves, they can put a thought in your head. They know the part of the brain that does the thinking. And you can be walking past. They can get a whole village to think a certain way. And you think it's your thoughts. They put the thought in your head because the thoughts don't come from you, do they? We just choose which thoughts we have. Where do your thoughts come from? They come from outside you. So they can put thoughts in and you'll think they're yours. There's more ways, more devious ways in this last generation. That's why the whole world will be deceived. 2,500 years later, we're deep into the last Babylon. This is the Babylon we're in now, I believe. And that's why Revelation says, come out of her, my people. We've got to get out of that system in our spirits. You can't physically disappear, can you? Well, the three incidents we've looked at have been to seduce the remnant of God's people. We've looked at Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, and Mordecai and Haman's son. We've looked at the three incidents to seduce and destroy God's people into false worship. And the fiery furnace, the lion's den, were only used because seduction wasn't effective. The devil would rather you worship him of your free will, so he seduces us. So we're worshipping through music, through false gods, through pop stars and celebrities. Anything that's not worshipping the true God is worshipping Satan. They're a mediator for Satan, aren't they? There's only two things you can worship. If you worship a football star, are you worshipping God? What's the alternative? You must be worshipping Satan through a mediator. If he takes praise, he's playing at God. Think about that. Anyone who takes the praise of men is playing God. You should reject praise, shouldn't you? We shouldn't clap ministers when they preach. I hate it when they clap me. When I understand it's coming to the church, but that's for the music hall. Nobody ever clapped a minister when he preached. He didn't go to be entertained. Clapping is to say, good show, you've preached well. I don't want to preach well. I want the Holy Ghost to convict men of sin and righteousness and judgment. I'm not worried about my delivery. It doesn't matter, does it? It's the Holy Ghost that convicts people, not my preaching. Thank God for that. So Satan would rather seduce people, but if he can't seduce you, he's got the backup force. He doesn't want to use force, Satan, because he wants to be like God and get worship from your free will. God won't force you, but the devil's so desperate that if you can't seduce you, he'll force you. The lion's den, the fiery furnace, annihilation of God's people. So we've looked at those incidents. And he wants to kill the remnant that the seed will come from. He wants to kill the bride. He wanted to kill the seed, Judah, that would come from, that Jesus would come from. Remember that Herod is another one type of Haman. He was from the seed of Amalek, Herod the Great. And he killed all the babies, not in Israel, in Judah. Can you see that's where Jesus would come from? He thought he would kill the Messiah. That battle's always on. Japheth and Ham, will come together in the last days to destroy the seed of Judah at the Battle of Armageddon. I've given a chart out on the last study showing that the three sons of Noah, Ham, Shem and Japheth. Shem came the seed of Judah, so we can forget that. And from that comes the Messiah and the bride. But from the other side, that's blue. The other side, the red and the orange, are the seed of Ham and Japheth. And there's where Gog and Magog come from, the Japheth. Gog and Magog come to the Battle of Armageddon, Meshach and Tubal and all those. and Cain. And they all come together for the Battle of Armageddon. That's the final. When Jesus comes as a Battle of Armageddon, the final solution to the two seeds. And some seeds won't be in the millennium. The battle now is for the bride of Christ. That's the battle. That's what Satan's trying to do, destroy the bride of Christ. Not the church, because the devil's always seduced the church. The church is a woman, isn't it? The bride of Christ. Israel were God's wife. Satan, unfortunately, this is not a chauvinistic statement, but Satan has no problem seducing women. The first woman on the planet is seduced. Adam was not in the transgression. He wasn't deceived. He took the fruit willingly to keep his wife, but Eve was deceived. When God chose a woman, Israel, 40 days after God had made the marriage contract up Mount Sinai, they were dancing naked round a golden calf. He seduced a woman. When Jesus initiated the bride of Christ in the upper room, and they had the communion, which is the marriage contract of Jesus and his bride, a few days later, Ananias and Sapphira got struck dead. They were seduced. The bride of Christ, the wife of God. And every revival that's ever happened in world history, the revival of Israel, when a true prophet came and brought them back to God, Elijah turned their hearts back to God, right through the history of Israel, right through the history of the church, whenever there's been a revival, 40 years later, they're dead as a dodo. It's jobs for the boys and political and voting. Revivals start because of the power of God and signs and wonders. That's revival. But you see, apostles start a denomination or start revival. But in the end, it's capable men, not apostles. They call themselves apostles because they're head of the denomination. But they're educated men who know the doctrines, you see. And sooner or later, the devil seduced them. We bring entertainment in the church. We bring business practices in the church. We bring the world in the church. So they've converted us. If I have to dress up as a hippie to win the hippies, they've converted me. I don't have to dress up as a hippie to preach to the hippies. My wife doesn't have to dress like a prostitute to go and witness to prostitutes. We don't have to be conformed to the world to win them. That's ridiculous. We're the light, the world's darkness. Fancy becoming a bit of darkness to give them light. How crazy is that? But we brought the world in the church. The church is so worldly, it's become a social club now. With entertainment, it's as good as the world. It's like a disco, some churches, with the flashing lights and the loud rock music. That's dancing round the golden calf. So Satan's not worried about the church. He can always seduce the church. He always has done. It's the bride, the remnant out of every generation that are holy, that won't compromise, that go through to the next generation. There's always a remnant go through. It doesn't matter that 2.5 million people died in the wilderness. 2 of the original got through. Doesn't matter if all the Jews in Babylon bowed to the golden calf, bowed to the statue. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego got through. It doesn't matter. There's always a remnant get through. And when you see there's always persecution, but a remnant get through. And that's the battle that we're in today. Satan doesn't want the bride to manifest. The bride has made herself ready. He'll use every means he can to stop the bride preparing herself, because Jesus can't come until the bride has made herself ready. That's what it says in Revelation. And the bride has made herself ready. Jesus won't make us ready. We've got to make ourselves ready. We've got to get rid of the spots and the wrinkles. We've been talking before how we keep needing to repent of our prejudice and little foxes that spoil the vine. Little spots in our wedding garments. We've got to get rid of those. The bride has to be pure virginal, doesn't it, for Christ? He's not going to marry a tatty woman. Who'd want to marry a woman and she's got all tatty clothes and dirty underwear? And no man would want to marry a woman like that. He wants a pristine woman, not one who's slept around with every man, not one who's taken the world in. Can you see how Jesus is desperate for a pure woman? And I understand that. I'm a man. You want the purest woman you can find, surely. The Pentecostal movement I was brought up in, and that was a move of God. The charismatic movement, the Jesuits were in it right from the beginning. I've got quotes where the Pope said the charismatic movement is the Catholic churches. And millions of dollars were paid to charismatic churches by witchcraft, by all sorts of things, in the 60s and 70s by the One World Order, to unite all denominations and get them into the Catholic Church. $10 million were paid to a church, I could name it, to introduce rock music into the church. In the 50s, rock music, that was the devil's music. No Christian would entertain rock music. That's the devil's music. But millions of dollars were paid in America to a church to introduce rock music. I know because I was a musician at the time, and Joni and I were on the first label in England. I think it was called the Dove label. We were the first record, Maranatha Music. That was the first Christian label to bring rock music, the world's music, into the church. And now it's rife. The drums are a hypnotic instrument. That's why they use them in the jungle. It's mesmeric. It affects your brain. Do you know that? Repetition, music, affects the brain, and it opens it up to allow things in. And that's why they use drums in the church. There's nothing wrong with music, loud music. Classical music is as loud as rock music, but it's not constant bombarding. There's crescendos and diminuendos, isn't there, in music? It's not constant, but rock music is loud all the way through, and it's bombastic, and the music goes through you. I'm an audio engineer. Sound waves actually pass through your body. They can pass through walls. It's very dangerous, loud music and repetitive music, and it's a hypnotic thing, and they're in the churches. I've put in, ministers used to tell congregations the dangers of drug-inspired rock music. Now we have the same music on their platforms and call it Christian celebration. How far have we fallen? I've got a book, Tozer, on music and worship. You should read it. I've got a quote from it. The book's called Worship and Entertainment. This is in the 50s, so it's 70 years ago. We must have a new reformation. This is what Tozer said. There must come a violent break with that irresponsible, amusement-mad, paganised pseudo-religion which passes today for the faith of Christ, and which has been spread all over the world by unspiritual men employing unscriptural methods to achieve their ends. That's pretty damning, isn't it? That was Tozer 70 years ago. But I've got the good news. God's always in control. You know, God's plan is perfect. The devil isn't in charge. God's in charge. His plan is perfect. And Satan raises God's man to prominence in his kingdom. Do you know that God uses Satan? And it's Satan that elevates God's man into the kingdom. God plants him. Remember Mordecai, we saw last study, that God got him in. He was a slave and he got into the government. He was just there, but he was a plant. And he was raised in a wicked king, Ahasuerus, who was a pagan. He was raised to the highest position in Satan's system. God always got his man. Well, Pharaoh had his Joseph. Pharaoh, who's a type of Satan, he raised Joseph to the highest place in his kingdom. Nothing happened without Joseph's permission. He was next to... Isn't it amazing that God has a plant? He had to go through prison to do it, but God uses Satan to bring his man that he's planted into prominence. So Joseph was raised by Pharaoh. Amazing. And Daniel was raised by Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was a plant. God got a plant, and he got him into Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar raised him, a wicked man. You see, God uses wicked men as well as good men. We think he only uses bad men. God said, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon is a golden cup in my hand. I'm going to use Babylon to punish my people. God uses the enemy to punish God's people. He used Babylon to punish Israel. Those three examples we've looked at, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, Daniel and Haman, have you noticed there were royal edicts for every one of the persecutions? It was legal. Every one of those, there was a royal edict that couldn't be changed. So that gives you some insight into what will happen in a few years. You won't buy and sell. It will be a legal requirement. Like the pandemic, it was a tester. It was illegal to go to certain places if you hadn't had the pandemic. It wasn't suggestion. They suggested it first, but then when it wasn't working, they made it more legal, didn't they? It wasn't a total legal thing, but fear caused people to do it voluntarily. They were seduced to do it. People who didn't want to do it were seduced to do it. I may lose my job. People who, I'm not criticising the vaccine or praising it. I don't want to talk about that argument now. But people who didn't want the vaccine took it because they thought they might lose their job. I can't travel. I can't go on holiday, so I don't want it, but I'll have to have it. Can you see how fear was used? It's one of the devil's means to control you. Fear. If he can't use fear, he'll use legal requirements, but he uses fear first. But you can see that in the end, it's the legal. You won't buy and sell, finished. That's what it's going to come to in the end. So we can see in the middle Babylon that this is prophesying. So the battle's about legality, you know. I mentioned it a little last night. How do you think angels and devils fight? Because when Daniel was fasting and praying, after he'd finished the intercession, the angel came and said, God sent the answer the first day you set your heart. Before you'd prayed, before you'd fasted. When you set your heart, I'm going to fast and pray. As soon as you set your heart, God sent the answer. This is the Michael, was it? But the prince of Persia, that evil spirit, resisted me. So there was a battle, but he prevailed. He says, and then I'm going to fight with the prince of Grecia. So he's prophesying the next empire. I'll have to contend with him. But how do they fight? If there was a battle, how did they fight? Can an angel kill a devil? Can you cut a demon's head off or chop an angel's arm off? How do they fight? They can't. They're not physical beings, so you can't fight physically, can you? With atom bombs, a million atom bombs wouldn't destroy one demon. They fight with legality because God is the judge. I've whole studies on this in the intercession. It's very important that Christians understand it. God is the judge and it's a legal battle. And Satan is the accuser of the brethren. He's the prosecutor. He goes to God and says, God, Maurice has sinned. He accuses me. It's in the court in heaven. God sat on the throne. He's the judge of all the earth. We know that. Thank God that Jesus is my advocate, my barrister, my solicitor. And he says, I've got the blood, Father. I died for Maurice. Case dismissed. It's a legal battle. If Jesus isn't standing on your behalf with the blood in the holiest of holies in heaven, in the temple in heaven, then Satan can accuse us day and night, but it doesn't hold water. I'm here, Father. Case dismissed. Case dismissed. We're covered by the blood, aren't we? Jesus took his own blood into the heaven, to the temple in heaven. Read it in Hebrews. Because a priest has to take gifts and sacrifices, and he took his own blood into heaven and is there at the right hand of God, ever interceding. So Satan must have access to heaven like he did in Job's day to accuse us, because it's a legal battle. So angels and devils fight with legality. That's the only way they can fight. And God is impartial. Did you know a judge must to be impartial? God doesn't favour us in judgment. He can't. A judge has to be impartial. if somebody comes before me and I'm a judge and they've committed a murder, we'll imagine that it was still the gallows. I'll say, the gallows for you, my lad. And I'm clapping my hands because he's my enemy. Got rid of him. My son comes before me and is murdered. What can I say? He's my son. I've got to say, the gallows for you, my son. And I go home and weep my heart out. But I can't discriminate. A judge cannot discriminate. A judge, when it says God is no respecter of persons, check your Bible. Every time it says God no respecter of persons, it's to do with judgment, not favour. God doesn't love everybody equal. If you read your Bible, he favours some more than others. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. That's respecting persons, isn't it? Of course he respects persons. I respect my wife more than every other woman. I chose her and rejected all you. Not that everyone was after me. But love is divisive, isn't it? If you choose one, you reject the others by default. Can you see? So if God chooses Abram, he is not choose everyone else. That's discrimination. I love discrimination. It's called choice, free will. I love discrimination. I want to choose who I want. Do you understand? God chooses who he wants. He doesn't choose everybody, does he? Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. But when it's God is no respecter of persons, the context is always justice, judgment. He can't respect persons because he'd be a bad judge. God would be a bad judge if he favoured Christians over non-Christians. He can only go on the evidence. If you've sinned and you've no advocate, the gallows, my son. It's simple, isn't it? So angels and devils, they contest God with legality. He's sinned. He's sinned. God says, you're right. I can't protect him. He's sinned. The devil can come and say, this Christian, they're full of bitterness and envy and gossip. And if it's true, God can't say, oh no. That's why Christians are sick and have problems in their life. They're not living right. How can God protect you when you're living wrong? The promises have a condition. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, he'll direct your paths. Depart from evil, do good and depart from evil. What's the promise? It'll be health to your navel. Your navel's where you get your life from your mother, your belly button, your navel. That's where you get the spiritual life. It's spiritual. Health to your navel and marrow to your bones. The blood's made in the bones. It's life. That's a health scripture. If you keep the condition. If you don't, how can God keep you healthy? Many are weak and sickly among you, many sleep, because you don't discern, you don't understand the Lord's body. So many Christians are sick because they think it's a symbol, and a symbol wouldn't help anyone, would it? It's life, it's Christ. You partake of Christ, not his flesh and blood. That's transubstantiation. So they fight legally. All who will not bow in the end days will be legally hunted down like criminals and destroyed. And there's laws being passed at the moment. Can you not see how the laws are being passed to restrict free speech? To the activities of those who want a whole... You can't say, I believe in marriage, one man, one woman. You're not allowed an opinion. There's no such thing as free press and free speech anymore. You cannot give your opinion. And it's only personal. I believe marriage is one man and one woman. I don't believe it's two men. I don't believe it's two women. You can't say that. That's discrimination. Why can't I have an opinion? There's a law against free will. I may be wrong. It's just my opinion. Why can't I have an opinion? It's only people's opinions that say transgender is good. That's their opinion. Well, that's all right. They've got an opinion. Why can't I have an opinion to say I believe it's a perversion? Why can't? There's laws to stop me living a holy life and speaking of holiness. You cannot speak of holiness and righteousness. There's laws coming out. Can you see how the church is being restricted and they're being deceived? Well, we've got to adhere to the principles. Many churches will accept gay marriages soon. I mean, Anglican churches, some Methodists already practice it. Pentecostals will in the end because they don't want to close the churches. Well, If we don't marry them, we'll have to close the church, and God knows we've got to keep the church open. So God knows our heart, but we'll have to compromise. They've proved they'll compromise when they wouldn't stand up with a pandemic. So they'll accept gay marriage. They'll accept abortion, euthanasia, because the church always assimilate the world after so many years of revival. The Methodists had a revival 200 years ago with John Wesley. Now they've accepted gay marriage. John Wesley would have never accepted it. Can you see how slowly we assimilate the world? It may take 50 or 100 years, but these days you can have a revival and 20 years later the church has been compromised because the world is speeding up. So we've got to be alert. Because there's been a revival in America or somewhere, don't think it'll last for the next 200 years. 6 weeks after the crusade, where signs and wonders and thousands have got saved, they're selling bits of the anointed tent, aren't they? And marketing the worship music, making money out of the worship that God inspired instead of giving it freely. Can you see how business comes into revival so quickly these days? They're selling the books and marketing the revival so soon. Even while the revival's on, they're marketing it. Can you see how business is coming in and corruption and making superheroes of them? Well, it's time for Christians to wake up, I believe, and stop listening to hype that comes from pulpits of so-called men of God who think that revival is coming. I can't find a worldwide revival in the last days. I know they talk about the first fruits and the second fruits, and they use all sorts of bizarre illustrations taken out of context. But I can't find in the Bible where there's a worldwide revival before Jesus comes. In fact, the opposite. Jesus said there'll be a great falling away. And Paul said, and the man of sin will be revealed. Watch and pray that you don't get caught out. The world will become Christian. The one world religion will be Christian. It won't be Islam. The one world religion. It won't be Hindu, it'll be Christian. Do you know why? Antichrist, not anti-Allah. Antichrist. The Catholic Church is the biggest denomination in the world. I think the Catholic Church and the Protestants are joining together now. I think together it's 3.2 billion. That's a third of the world are Christian in name. Can you see? In Germany, they passed laws now. Did you know Sunday worship's coming back? Sunday work will be banned. Germany have banned it already. Catholic. It's a Catholic day, Sunday. So they're bringing it in ready to worship Satan on Sunday. The laws are getting passed. You can check it on the internet. I wasn't sure. I've got it in my notes. I thought, I wonder if Germany has banned Sunday work. And it's true. You can check it out. Things are happening. Incest is as acceptable in 10 US states. 10 US states, it's not illegal to practice. Sorry, not incest, bestiality. That's worse, isn't it? Bestiality is not illegal in 10 states and in Japan and other countries. I've remembered Japan and 10 states of America, but there's other countries as well. That's unbelievable, isn't it? Can you see how laws are being passed to make perversions acceptable and normal to this generation? And the church are not fighting it. They're compromising all the time. The remnant, I believe, are delaying the coming of Christ while she gets ready. You are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. The earth isn't the world, and the world isn't the earth. The earth is God's physical creation. God created it. The world doesn't exist as anything physical. It's cosmos, the Greek word. It means the order, the mindset, the world order, the thinking. Satan is the god of this world, the mindset, the culture, the fashion, the business. That's that world. And we've got to be light in the world, but we've got to be salt in God's creation. And salt stops corruption. When things are corrupt, what do? You burn them. Disease, you burn it, don't incinerate it, germs. That gets rid of germs. So the earth is corrupt. We know that because of the blood that's been shed. The blood corrupts the earth. Why hasn't God destroyed the earth if it's corrupt? Because the bride, the remnant, are the salt of the earth. The only thing that's stopping God destroying the earth, this, when God looks down and sees holy people, a remnant who won't compromise, who are living holy lives, he sees salt and he won't destroy the earth. But when the bride is taken out, that's the last vestige of salt, then the earth will be destroyed. Can you see God's plan? He won't destroy it wherever the bride's there. Wherever the salt's there, you're the salt of the earth, or we should be. But when the salt's taken out, then it's fit for destruction, and God will destroy it. Well, the One World Order have said that they want to deplete the earth to 500 million. There's 7 billion, 7.5 billion. So that's most of the earth population have got to be destroyed. I don't know if you know about the Georgia Guidestones. Nobody knows who put them up. They're in Georgia, obviously. And it's an alternative. It's like the Ten Commandments. It's like Stonehenge in America. But on it is writing in different languages. And it's the manifesto for the One World Order. Nobody knows who put it there. And 3 weeks ago, somebody bombed it, or they did, to got rid of it, and it fell down. And then they said, oh, we're taking it down because it's not safe. But I think it's done its job. It's not a victory for Christians. It's done its job. But let me read you what's put on the Guidestones. And this was put up, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago, I'm guessing. So don't hold me to that. It's the American official equivalent of Stonehenge. Number 1, there's 10 statements, so it's like the 10 commandments of the One World Order. Number 1, maintain humanity to 500 million in perpetual balance against nature. So cull the world's population. Eugenics. Winston Churchill was a eugenist, I don't know if you know. So was H.G. Wells. So is Microsoft. Bill Gates is a eugenist. They all were. Because everyone at the top is bought into this. It's evolution, survival of the fittest. We'll cull the undesirables. The elite won't get culled. They'll kill the undesirables. Africa, well, they're only African Negroes. They're just suppliers with cheap labour. And so they'll get rid of all those undesirables, as they say, like Hitler was going to do. Hitler was a eugenist. It's the survival of the fittest. And it's all right. If we kill 6.5 billion people, it shows that we're the fittest. So we go on to the next quantum leap of evolution. It's quite legitimate to cull people because it's evolution, the survival of the fittest. Can you see how they rationalise it? It's quite reasonable to them. They don't think they're bad men. Number 2, guide reproduction wisely. In other words, control. One parent, one family, one child, a family. In China, they implemented it. China was the template for the One World Order, if you don't know, under Mao Zedong. And that's why they forced the one-child family. And if you had more than 2, you had to pay money, or they would forcibly sterilise you. This is coming in for the whole world. Control the population. Guide reproduction wisely. It means population control. You've got to read what they mean. Improving fitness and diversity for reproduction. Diversity. There's 100 genders, isn't there? Can you see how it's coded? But we can see. Unite humanity with a living new language. Back to Babel. Rule passion, faith and tradition. Stop passion. Nobody can be passionate about anything. You're all robots, don't forget. You just do as you're told. Get rid of faith and tradition. All things with tempered reason. New age language. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Fair laws. Are the laws being passed fair? They're fair for them. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. The One World Court. They've already got a One World Court. 1945, the World Court in The Hague. They've already set up One World Court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. petty laws. Oh, that's morality. We've got rid past morality. We've moved on to the next level. Balance personal rights with social duties. Balance them. In other words, lose all your personal rights, you just do social duties. Very clever. It sounds good to a person who's not got the mind of Christ. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Sounds like Masonic, doesn't it? Truth, fraternity, all the words. They sound good words, but with the infinite, that's not my God. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. In other words, be happy for them to cull you. Be happy when you're 70 to kill yourself, euthanasia, legal euthanasia, because you've done your part. You're just a cancer on earth. You're a useless eater. You're using the world's resources, using electricity, food, and there's people starving, so top yourself. I'm saying it crudely, but that's what they're saying. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. So that was on the manifesto. So it was all there for everyone to see, but everyone thought, oh, it's wonderful. Yes, in harmony with nature. They don't read between the lines. But surely you who's watching can see when I brought out words. I'm quoting from, this is not my thing, it's a quote, so it's a fact. According to 2 subsequent documents put out by the World Bank, new guidelines dictate that in order to qualify for World Bank lending, nations must implement population reduction. You won't get the loans unless you agree. Africa, they've all agreed. Wherever you go, there's posters in Uganda and that about birth control and about... You won't get the loans. The World Bank have said that the nations can't get the loans unless they introduce population reduction objectives as outlined by the World Bank. So not outlined how we think, well, we're in Nigeria, so we think this. No, the World Bank will tell you how many you've got to reduce by. Population, by the UN Population Fund, already tested and implemented in Yemen and Niger. These new guidelines are destined for global implementation within the next decade, say the World Bank. We're going to implement it on everyone who wants to. And every country in the world is in debt to the World Bank. Did you know it? America, 20.2 trillion in debt. England, 3.2 million in debt. 3.2 trillion in debt. Everyone's in debt to the World Bank. So, of course, they've got to reduce the population. Of course they have, because they're in debt to the World Bank. What does the Bible say? The borrower is servant to the lender. Let that sink in. The borrower is servant to the lender. So if you borrow money, you're serving them. You've got to do what they say, or else they take the loan back. If you don't pay your mortgage, they take the house off you. No compassion. The banks will just close you down. If the business can't pay a loan, it doesn't matter if you've been banking for 40 years with Barclays Bank, they'll just take the deeds away because you're serving them. You've got money off them. Don't get trapped. Get debt free. I'm telling Christians all over the world, get debt free, because you're trapped. You're serving the system with debt. That's the devil's job, to get everyone in debt, and every country's in debt. Well, Satan's plan can't be accomplished. He can't get the whole world to worship. Well, people won't bow the knee. And it's really seduced the world and most of the church. He knows when it happens, he'll lose his place in heaven. When the bride go up, Revelation 12, the woman, I believe the man-child is not Jesus, because Jesus wasn't snatched up to heaven as soon as he was born, was he? He was 3 years. It's the bride. Satan's not after the woman. Have you ever thought about Revelation? There's a big red dragon, and the woman's pregnant, ready to give birth. Why not just kill the woman? Because the woman's Satan's. The woman is the dragon's. It's Babylon. He's already seduced it. He's after the man-child. He's after the revival that comes out of the whore. Every revival comes out of a backslidden church. They've played the whore. Can you see it? So every revival comes out of an unclean woman. But a baby who's born of a prostitute is a virgin. The revival's pure. It's that when they grow up, they decide to follow the mother. We're all daughters of Babylon. Every denomination is a daughter of Babylon after 50 years because they've compromised and perverted themselves through prostitution, spiritual prostitution. So the devil's after the man-child, the bride. If he can stop the bride, because when the bride goes up to heaven, what's the next words? There was a war in heaven. And Satan's cast out. When the bride goes up, Satan can no longer accuse the brethren. He's cast out. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because the devils know his time is short. The devil knows that when the bride goes up, he's cast down, and he knows he's got a short time. He knows his fate is the lake of fire. He knows it. The demon said to Jesus, have you come to torment us before our time? So they know. Satan knows his fate. But he's fighting it, he's fighting it, he's fighting it, he's fighting it by every means possible. And if he can stop the bride preparing and getting translated, Satan will never lose his place in heaven, be cast down to the earth, and his fate is secure. That's what he's fighting for, his very existence. It's not he's fighting for his own salvation, his own existence. Because when he's in the lake of fire, that's him finished. Can you see how important and how pernicious and deceitful Satan is to stop the bride? And he's seduced every potential bride. Every time Israel were revived, he seduced them again. So let me come to an end. I've come to the end. I don't want to say any more. So we've got to be bold, haven't we? Courageous and strong in spirit and fight. Put on the armour of God. All the talk from all the epistles of Jesus about the last day. Be vigilant. Be strong. Don't let the day catch you unawares. The devil's going around like a roaring lion. It's all about the last days. Peter, read what Peter and Paul said about the last days of Jesus. There'll be a great falling away of the man of sin will be revealed. I told you about it, Paul said. Don't let anyone deceive you. That day won't happen. The rapture won't happen whenever you face it until the man of sin is revealed. It's God's plan. So I hope this is a positive study and not a negative one. You know, we have the promise of victory and rewards. There's rewards, well done, good and faithful. If, there's always an if, isn't there? If we overcome. Read the letters to the churches and encourage yourself with the promises. To him that overcomes, I'll give a crown of life. He'll rule the nations with a rod of iron with Christ. Read the letters to the churches. The promises are phenomenal if you overcome. But it's an if. Have something against you, get rid of that. You've left your first love. But if you overcome, I'll give you the Star of David. I'll give you a crown. You'll reign in righteousness. You'll subdue the nations with me. The promises are phenomenal, but it's all about the letters to the churches are to prepare the bride. They're all telling us the faults of the church. So read them and find where your fault is. Have you left your first love? Have you allowed the woman Jezebel in the church to seduce them? What have we allowed in the churches? Read the letters practically and say, what have we allowed? Where's the spots and wrinkles in my life, in my church? And get rid of them, because if you overcome, the promises are stupendous. You'll reign with Christ. Is that not reward enough? Is that not enough incentive to get rid of the encumbrances and the things that bind us to this life? I can reign with Christ. I can be his bride. A physical union is wonderful, and it is. I love marriage and the union, two becoming one. If that's wonderful in the flesh with a good partner, of course, how much more wonderful the spiritual union of Christ and his bride. Marriage will fail into insignificance. You won't even think about the physical when you're united to Christ. It'll be so glorious, so exuberant, so transcendent. It'll be fantastic, won't it? Get excited about meeting Jesus and get rid of the spots and wrinkles. And have a wonderful day. I'm going because I'll carry on preaching. The next study, the dawning of a new age. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. Tune in for the next study.